Without worrying about exercise selection, without worrying about anything else and what training split you should be on and what supplements you should take, the things you need to focus on, and there's two most important things: get stronger and get heavier. You basically need to week increase your body weight. So get heavier by eating in a calorie surplus, which means eating more calories than you burn. And you want to make sure that you're getting stronger in the gym. So it doesn't matter necessarily the exercises. If you run off of those two things, no matter what, you will be building muscle. So get stronger and get heavier. Building upon that, the second thing we want to focus on is making sure that every movement, no matter what it is, and every time we go and do a rep, that the reps look the same every single time. So every time I do a bench press, or I do a lat pull down, or I do a leg extension, no matter what the exercise, you want to standardize the movement. And that means you want to make every single rep look the same every single time. No matter what the weight, no matter how many reps you're going for, the reps need to look the same every single time. So having a system and having a way that you execute on exercises is going to be really important. This is why we always say form comes first. So form and then weight. So no matter what you do, before you stack loads of weight on, you need to make sure that the movement is the same every single time. If you can repeat the exercise the same way every single time, no matter what weight's on the bar, that means that you're going to be able to equally and evenly track progress. Because if you're changing your form every single time and it looks different every single rep, you aren't going to be able to know whether you're progressing due to actually getting stronger and actually the adaptations that you're looking for, or actually the movement's progressing because you are skipping out on a portion of the movement. You're not taking it to its fullest range of motion. You aren't controlling the eccentric the way it should be. And those are the things that you need to make sure you do. So that's why we standardize the movement. We don't necessarily worry about how fast it is as such, but it needs to look the same every single time. So nutrition for muscle building comes down to as simply as trying to be in a calorie surplus. Taking your body weight and trying to get heavier over time while getting stronger is the most important thing, but we need to make sure that we're not doing it too quick. So what we want to try and minimize when trying to gain weight is gaining a load of body fat alongside the muscle that we're building, right? Because if that does happen, then when we decide that we want to kind of cut for summer, or you have a bodybuilding competition, if you've got too much body fat, then the diet you're going to have to go on and the deficit you're going to have to be in is going to be much longer than it would be if we didn't have as much body fat. And we control that by making sure that the surplus that we're in isn't that big. So what do we aim for? The amount that your body weight wants to increase is going to be the most important thing. We want to look to increase somewhere between like 0.5% of your body weight to 2% of your body weight per month, which is different to when you're trying to lose weight. You could do 1 to 2% of your body weight per week, but when we're trying to gain weight, when we're trying to gain muscle, 0.5 to 2% of your body weight per month is going to be the rate of gain that we're looking for. Now, what does that look like? So for me, I'm a 90 kilo guy. That would mean that I would aim for, let's make it easy. Let's say I'm going to aim for 1 kilo a month. That's going to be my rate of gain that I'm looking for. That is just over 1% of my body weight, and that means that each week I'm going to look to gain 0.25 kilos. It's not that much weight over a period of time, but if I do that for 12 months consistently, if I do that for 16, 18 months consistently, you can see how easily I would have gained 10 plus kilos over that time. When does it change? If you're a newbie, you can aim for 2%. So you can go 2% of your body weight per month would be a great shout and a great place to start, because at the very start, you have no muscle, so you can gain muscle way quicker than someone like myself can. But what do? So I try to aim for 0.5%. On this next gain that I go on, it'll be towards that. It was 1% on the last one, but as I'm getting more and more advanced, I want to slow that down. That's so I don't gain as much body fat, and that means that when I go into my cut, like I said, it's not going to be as hard as this one currently is. So for me, again, 0.9, let's just take it up to 1 so we can split that in half. I'm going to look to gaining like 0.15 kilos per week. So 0.5 kilos per month, which isn't a lot at all when it comes to a surplus. And that means your surplus probably isn't going to be that big. The surplus you want to aim for is probably around 300 calories extra than your maintenance. Now, start there and increase from there, because some people have a different response to surpluses. Some people need to be 1,000 calories over their subscribed maintenance to see any type of change on the scales, and some people just need a little bit. So start at 300 kcals. If you don't see any changes within a week, bump it up by 100 and keep doing that until you start to see the weight change. So, what is the actual thing that helps us to build muscle? What is hypertrophy? We stimulate hypertrophy or building muscle by stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis is basically the building of proteins. It is the building of muscle tissue, right? Muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown are happening all the time in our bodies. Muscle protein breakdown is basically our body tearing down proteins. We want to be stimulating muscle protein synthesis as much as possible so we aren't breaking it down. So what does that look like? Well, basically muscle protein synthesis can be stimulated every 3 to 5 hours, because when you spike it, when you stimulate muscle protein synthesis, it stays spiked for around 3 to 5 hours. And then it kind of peters off after about 24 to 48 hours. We want to spike it as often as possible. And we do that through either training, spikes muscle protein synthesis, or eating adequate amounts of protein, about 20 to 30 grams will do it. For you, that would just mean that we want to train muscles as often as possible, and we want to eat protein as often as possible. This is why the recommendation a lot of the time is eat protein every 4 hours, because that way you're stimulating muscle protein synthesis when it needs to be, so we're trying to keep that high and that signal high throughout the rest of the day. So you now know that you need to stimulate muscle protein synthesis by either training or eating protein. Eating protein every 4 hours is a great way to do it, and training your muscle groups as often as you can. Now, we say as often as you can because obviously that spike in muscle protein synthesis lasts for 24 to 48 hours, which means if you can, training your muscle groups at least twice a week, or training each muscle at least twice a week, will be the best thing for you when it comes to gaining muscle. So see if you can do that. See if you can work out a training plan and try to hit the same muscle group twice in a week. So when I talk about making the exercise look the same, what I mean is we want to make sure that we are controlling the movement. We want to make sure that we've got a same system every single time. Now, you'll notice with me, and I've said this loads, that on the way down of the movement wants to be slower than the way up. That's just a really basic rule. But that looks like taking 2 to 4 seconds on the way down, and that looks like taking 1 to 2 seconds on the way up. Now, you don't have to go really, really slow on this coming down. But what you do want to do is make sure that when you're getting to the bottom of the movement, the most stretched position of your muscles, that you're spending time in the lengthened range. Now, what that means is as you get to the bottom of a dumbbell bench press, the bottom 25% of the movement as you're coming into the stretch is where you want to spend most of your time. Lengthen under load builds muscle. So that's the thing that we want to make sure we focus on, is as we're lowering that weight down, the first 75% may take 1 second, but that bottom 25% might take 1 to 2 to 3 seconds before we drive back up. If you keep it the same every single week, you can replicate that every single week, and then you will know if you're progressing or you're getting stronger. So don't jump around with tempos, and don't overly do slowness on the way down. You don't actually get any rewards for that. All you want to make sure you do and really want to try and milk is the stretch position. So make sure that you take your time as you're getting to the bottom of the movement, as you're getting to the most stretched position. Now, when it comes to exercises and when it comes to the program that you want to follow, the actual exercises themselves don't necessarily matter, but what does matter is your progression. So you need to pick an exercise, and let's start with the basics of just picking an exercise that you can do so that you're competent within, you can actually perform that exercise, and that you can progress within. With a lot of programs, you'll see them change programs every 4 weeks, or change exercises. Now I do that, and I do that because it keeps people interested. But if someone isn't that bothered, then I will keep the same exercise in for as long as they progress on it. And you can progress on an exercise for way longer than you think. So for me, when it comes to exercise selection, don't overthink it. Don't necessarily think, do I pick a bench press over a dumbbell press? Do I pick a machine press over a shoulder press? What do I pick? It doesn't matter. What matters is you pick the exercise that you're good at and you can perform in the correct way, and then you can progress that week to week. Again, if you're getting bored of the same exercises, then yeah, switch it up. Because again, if the exercises don't necessarily matter, then why keep them for a long period of time? And that's because actually we get better at the exercise, which is some of the increase in strength that we get is because we're just more efficient at the exercise. But then also, it just means that we can see a clear progress week to week that we are progressing. Because last week on that exercise, with my form being exactly the same, I did 4 reps at 100 kilos. Well, this week I've done 6 reps at 100 kilos. Or this week I've done 6 reps at 105 kilos. Really easy to see the progress. Whereas if you're switching exercises week to week or session to session, you have no idea if you're making progress or not, because you're not sure if you are actually progressing on that exercise, if you are getting stronger, and if you are going to be, again, stimulating that muscle protein synthesis. So how much volume do you need to gain muscle? Let's break volume down into just sets. It's the easiest way to think about it. And most studies have shown that 12 to 20 sets is where we want to be aiming for most muscle growth. But how do we spread that out? Now, if you are an advanced trainer and you've been training for a while, you probably actually you are the one who will need more sets, right? You will be the one who will need more volume over time. But why do I give volume more to beginners? And the reason I give more sets to beginners, or at least I spend less exercises and more sets, is because I want to keep the beginner learning the movement. So if you are new to training, your best bet is to actually spread your volume over fewer exercises rather than having loads of exercises, because you need to learn how to do them. Once you've learned how to do them, you can then start to add more exercises into your training plan, and you can spread the volume across that. So say we're going to aim for 12 sets, right? At the very start, you might do 2 to 3 exercises on a given muscle group, right? Within a week or within your training day. So that means that 12 sets will be spread across that. So it'll be either 5 sets, or it'll be 6 sets per exercise, or it'll be 4 sets per exercise if you're doing 3 exercises. That gives you the 12 sets that you need, and that will give you the ability to learn the movement, because that's going to be the most important thing as a beginner. As you get more advanced and you get good at the movement, you actually don't need that much, many sets per exercise as you could think. You don't need to be in this 3 to 4 range all the time. You can do, depending on your total volume for the week and the total exercises you have, because again, we want to aim for somewhere between that 12 to 20 sets per muscle group per week to gain muscle. And they do think that somewhere between 4 to 8 sets will actually elicit most, 80% of your muscle growth. So starting smaller with the amount of volume you need and then building up over time would be my advice. I actually have reduced my volume compared to what I was doing previously, and that is because I'm actually efficient at the movements, and now what I'm trying to practice is trying to just get stronger and get heavier. That's how I'm approaching the building muscle side of it. So why is frequency good for building muscle? So frequency is the amount of times you train a muscle group or an exercise each week. We know that muscle protein synthesis spikes after 3 to 5 hours, and then it peters off around 24 to 48 hours later. Muscle protein synthesis is a pretty local thing, meaning that if I train my quads, muscle protein synthesis will spike in my quads. There is a systemic effect, but say it's mainly in my quads, which means that I probably want to train my quads again after around 48 hours if I can. We do that because then you are stimulating muscle protein synthesis as much as possible. So I stimulate muscle protein synthesis, it spikes for 3 to 5 hours, it peters off after 48 hours, and I spike it again. So if you think about it almost like a heartbeat going along a scale, we want to spike it, it drops back off, and spike it when it gets to baseline, drops back off, spike it when it gets to baseline. The more often we train a muscle, the more often we're going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, the more muscle we are going to build. That would make sense. This is why you'll see people trained by JP. He'll be recommended doing full body or upper lower splits. If you think about it, a full body, you're going to be hitting your same muscle group every 48 hours. You're going to be hitting it, literally, you're going to go full body on Monday. You'll have the Tuesday off, and then you'll be hitting it again. That's going to be like a 48-hour period between training. If you're doing an upper-lower split, you are going to be hitting the same muscle group after 72 hours. So you train on the Monday, you then have Tuesday doing lower body, so you have upper body Monday, you have Tuesday doing lower body, you rest on the Wednesday, and then you start again. You just repeat that cycle over and over again. That is why frequency is recommended. That is why he recommends that. It's not because that's the magic split, or upper lower is better than push pull, or full body is the best thing you should do, because no one actually explains why we do it. And we do it because we actually want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis as often as possible. Now, I'm not going to make you do an upper lower split. I'm going to talk about splits later on, because I think the split comes down to preference, comes down to what you want to do. But if you want to do the most optimal, it would be stimulate muscle protein synthesis every 48 hours through training, as well as your protein intake, but through training, which means you want to train the same muscle group as often as possible, as a minimum twice a week. Along those lines, why not do full body every single day? And that's because you actually need to be able to recover, to be able to perform the exercise again. If you remember, going back to basics, going back to the very first thing, we want to get stronger on an exercise. Now, even though there are squat everyday programs and you could come in and do one set and the next day you can come and do another set, the amount of recovery you are probably having isn't enough to get the adaptation needed. So recovering from exercise is a bit different to actually stimulating an adaptation or creating an adaptation. You create the adaptation through the stimulus you provide. Now, if you provide or train too much or too often or too much volume, then you're going to be increasing the recovery demands just from like the amount of sleep you're going to need, the amount of protein you're going to need, and the amount of like time it's going to take to repair the muscles. So that means that it doesn't make sense to train your same muscle group every single day, but it would make sense for you to train it every other day. So what's the relationship between volume and frequency? We know that muscle protein synthesis, again, spikes after 5 hours. 24 to 48 hours later it's depleted or it's back to baseline. So we want to stimulate that as often as possible. So if we're doing an upper-lower split, we're stimulating that every 72 hours. If we're doing a full body split, it'd be every 24, 48 hours, right? So because we know that we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, we also know that the amount of volume we need to build muscle is somewhere between 12 to 20 sets. How do we actually make sure that our volume and frequency are aligned so we're not overtrained going into the next session? Your split and the amount of volume you're going to be able to do will be dictated by your life. So if you are someone who doesn't have anything going on and you can just train as much as possible and say you're going to be doing a full body split or you're going to do upper lower and it doesn't matter about your schedule, you can split your volume just evenly over those sessions per the week. That's going to be the advice no matter what. Is if we're saying we're going to do a minimum of 2 sessions per week, on the same muscle group, we want to spread the 12 sets over those 2 sessions, which means we'll do 6 sets on session 1 and 6 sets on session 2. And that is as easy as frequency and volume needs to be. Is you just need to make sure that you are getting those 12 to 20 sets in, or even less, the 4 to 8 sets, again, we'll give you like 80%. You want to just make sure that you're getting enough sets in to kind of send the signals that you need to send, that muscle building signal. But you also then want to make sure that your volume's equated over the week. So we're trying to hit those 12 sets, start as a minimum, and we're going to spread that out. If I'm doing the same muscle group 3 times a week, then I might spread those sets out to do 4 sets each session. Rather than doing, if I was only training that muscle group once, I'd have to do all those 12 sets in one. And this is why the split that you actually pick isn't as important as you think. Whether you're a body part split, a push-pull legs, an upper lower, a full body, none of that really matters. We just want to think what's optimal. Optimal, train your, we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis every 48 hours. So we want to train the muscle group as much as possible, but we want to spread our volume of 12 to 20 sets equally over our training week and over our splits. So if you are doing an upper lower split, for example, that would mean you'll do somewhere between 3 to 7 sets per session, per muscle group, okay? And that would look like going in and you've got your shoulders, you've got your back, you've got your chest. Let's just go with those 3 and chuck your arms in because you want them as well. So you just want to make sure every single time you come in, you've got 3 sets spread out across each of those exercises. So that would look like literally doing, say we do pull-ups for your lats. Say we do for your back and your lats. Say we're going to do a chest press for your chest. We're going to do a shoulder press for your shoulders. We're going to do a bicep curl, dumbbell bicep curl for your arms. We're going to do a tricep push down for your triceps. If you've got 3 sets on each of those exercises, that's a good upper session. And you can just repeat that every 3rd day. So you have upper, lower, rest, upper, lower, rest, and the system just repeats. So the way that you should split your volume is you need to figure out how many times a week you can train. And then you need to figure out the training split that you're going to do. And then you need to figure out how many times you're going to hit each muscle group. Once you've figured out how many times you're going to hit each muscle group, you then decide how you're going to spread your volume. Again, start at the low end. Start at the 12 sets per muscle group per week, and then spread your volume equally over the sessions that you're going to be doing. So for me at the moment, I'm doing a push-pull leg system, and that means that I am just spreading the volume equally over those sessions. The split that you pick will actually be dictated by what you enjoy and your lifestyle. So say you're going to pick a body part split because that's how you like training, right? Well, if that's the thing you're going to do and you're going to do a body part split, then you've got to take into account that you might be sacrificing, or you might not be as optimal as someone who's doing a full body split because you're not stimulating muscle protein synthesis as often as possible. For me, enjoyment's always going to be the first thing, because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, enjoy the training, you're never going to do it, and you're never going to be able to push to where we need you to push. So figure out your split based on enjoyment, and just know that there may be some sacrifices that you are actually, like, there's some gains you're leaving on the table because you're not trying to stimulate muscle protein synthesis as often as possible. Now, what is the best training split? So if you've heard me at all speak through this, if you've been listening to this at all, you will know that there isn't really a best training split. The training split that's best for you might be different to someone else, and that might be down to just what fits into your lifestyle. Now, to some degree, the kind of hardcore people will say, ignore your lifestyle, just train the most optimal way. The full body when you're a beginner, and when you need to increase the volume, go into an upper-lower split, right? Now, that works great, but if you're someone who has a life and you have responsibilities, you might not be able to get to the gym every day. So then how do you try and make yours as optimal as possible? Now, I'm going to give you loads of different training splits, and you can just start to see, and then I'm going to go into detail on how I would get you to use them, or when I would use them, and how many sessions a week work best with which split. And you can pick from there. So there's a full body split, there's upper lower split, and there's push pull legs. Those are like the three main ones you will see. You then have a body part specific split, where you have people who will do one body part per session per week, and that's it. They don't stimulate it again at all. One of my favorite splits that I get people to do a lot of the time is to do a push pull legs, or do a lower push pull, and then we go lower upper. And that's like my favorite way of doing things, because then that's 5 sessions over the week. You have a lower session, a push session, a pull session, and you have another lower and upper. So we're going to be stimulating muscle protein synthesis again and getting that twice a week kind of frequency that we want as a minimum if we're doing that split. Another way of doing it is by having a pull day on a Monday, which is a bit more of a lower body focus, or at least has some posterior chain focus to it. Because you're going to maybe hit a deadlift on that day. That might stimulate like muscle protein synthesis for your legs again, right? Because there's some quad involvement in it when you're doing a deadlift. But then we're going to stimulate the muscles of our back as well. So that's going to be a pull session. Then you're going to have a push session where you're going to do all your triceps, your chest, your shoulders, and then you got a lower body session. So again, stimulating muscle protein synthesis again, based upon that pull session, including some muscle protein synthesis spiking for our lower body. And then you're going to do another pull session. So again, stimulating the muscles of our back, but this time we're not going to do any lower body pulling in that. We're just going to make sure that it's all upper body pull, stimulating or getting a big stimulus for our back, for our lats, for our traps, for our rhomboids in that session. And then we've got another push session within there as well. That for me stimulates and hits all things that we're after. It gives you all a little bit of you get some fun with a deadlift session, a bit more hardcore session, a bit more of like a power building approach, and then you've got more of like a bodybuilding pull session in there as well. That's the way I've trained for years, and I've only recently changed to a push-pull legs and a week's A and B recently, because for me, switching over to a push-pull legs is doing what I need. I need more quads. I need more quads to increase my strength of my squat, because I need to get bigger and stronger quads and get used to actually firing them in the movement in a squat. But it also means that I'm going to stimulate each muscle group as much times as possible in a split that I actually enjoy. My split, for example, is I train 5 days a week. I basically train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I have Thursday as a rest day, and then I train Friday, Saturday, and have Sunday as a rest day. Now, that fits in with my lifestyle, that fits in with my work commitments, that fits in with basically how I enjoy to train. Gives me 2 rest days, so it stops me feeling like fucked. It actually allows me to do work rather than just being pretty useless on the days that I'm not training. And it allows me to then get everything I need in by doing the push-pull legs, but having a week A version, or having A version and a B version. So then all I do is I just rotate 6 sessions, but over my 5 training sessions. So one week I will do push-pull legs, push-pull, and the next week I'll start with the lower. So it'll be legs, pull, push, and then it'll be legs, push, or pull again. Sorry, I'm getting confused, but you can see it just bumps on. I'll do a little drop down so you can see everything pretty there. Right, let's rock through the best training split for you based upon the amount of days that you can train. So if you can only train twice a week, you want to go full body. That is going to be the recommendation that everyone should give. And that is because we want to be able to train our muscle groups as much as possible. Again, no matter if you can train on a Monday and a Friday or a Tuesday and a Thursday or whatever your layout of your week is, but say you can only get 2 sessions in, full body is going to be the best approach. It just means that we can stimulate muscle protein synthesis of all of the different muscles that we need to. And it also means that like you train everything as well. So like if you do an upper lower, you're not getting that minimum 2 frequency that we want. And you're gonna not be stimulating muscle protein synthesis, so you're not gonna be building muscle in other areas. But it also means that if you are someone who can only train twice a week, chances are you're quite busy or you're new to training, so it's not that big of a commitment for you. And that might mean that you will actually skip another session, so you'll only end up with 1 a week. The last thing that you want is to do an upper lower split and it be 6 weeks, but since you've hit your lower body. Trust me, I know who you are. So that's why we would go full body if you're doing twice a week. If you're training 3 days a week, there are a couple of different ways you could do it. Now, full body would be my advice if you have a rest day in between each one. So say your schedule lines up on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you train. Full body again, stimulating muscle protein synthesis would be the best thing. Now, the problem with full body is that it actually can get quite long, and the sessions can get very long if you've been training quite a lot. What I mean by that is like if it takes you a while to get up to your working weight on your exercise, because you have to warm up for every single different muscle group, so you got to warm up for every different exercise, the session might be quite long. For example, when I do sessions with clients, it takes us 30 minutes normally by the time we've warmed up and finished the first exercise. So if that's half an hour and you've got to hit every single muscle group, that session can quickly get very, very long if you're reasonably strong, that is. And that depends upon the amount of sets you're going to be doing again. So this is why it's quite difficult for full body, and sometimes it can be quite impractical. Now, the likes of like JP and people who are very much high intensity driven, meaning volume's lower, but the effort that you're doing is higher. People like that would say, well, you can just do one working set per muscle, per group, per muscle, per exercise, like per session, which is great. But again, remembering if you're a beginner or you need to learn how to move and learn how to do the exercise, you're probably going to want a few more sets. And I find that beginners won't be able to actually push to the right intensities that are needed to stimulate the kind of what they're trying to stimulate. You won't be able to get the progress and you won't be able to stimulate muscle protein synthesis because you don't know how to move and you don't know how to actually do the exercise correctly, which is why full body to some degree can be a good shout, or it might not be the best shout, because you might not end up hitting all muscle groups. And this is where we end up with bang for your buck exercises, right, with a full body split. With a full body split, you're going to be ending up doing, like, you want to have some kind of row, some kind of like vertical press, some kind of horizontal press, and some kind of like lower body pushing exercise, some kind of lower body pulling exercise. There, right there is 5, and if we added in like a vertical, like if you had a vertical push, a vertical pull, and you had a horizontal pull in there, it'd be 6 exercises. And that way you're not actually hitting all of the individual muscle groups that you might want to hit. You might not be able to do your side delts. You might not be able to do your biceps because you're picking bang for your buck exercises that are big compound lifts. That would be the way I would get you to do a full body, would be to go, right, we're just going to do compound exercises within our full body session. And I'll talk about the ones that we want you to do later on. But if you're training 3 times a week, again, you can go full body every other day. So you do Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, your full body. Say that it doesn't work out like that. Say you have 2 days where you train back to back and then you're off for a couple of days and you got another 2 days back to back or another 1 day later on in the week. That would be when I would push you to do something like an upper-lower split, but you have 2 different sessions. If you're more advanced, you're going to want 2 different upper-lower variations where you have an upper A and an upper B, and you have a lower A and a lower B. So you would go, your first session would be upper A, second session would be lower A, third session would be upper B. And then you start the next week, lower B, and then back to upper A, lower B. And it just switches like that. So you have 2 versions of your upper, 2 versions of your lower. My favorite way of getting people to do it, actually, to be able to make sure that we're stimulating and hitting the frequency mark, is to do an upper, lower, and a full body split. That would be how I would split up a 3-day week. You get the fun of an upper, you get the fun of a lower, and then you hit everything and get that frequency box ticked by doing a full body. That would be one of my favorite ways if you're training 3 days a week. So if you're training 4 days a week, it would be a case of upper lower fits perfectly into that, upper lower rest repeat, upper lower rest repeat. If you're a beginner, you're probably going to want to keep the same upper and lower session and just repeat that week to week. But you might find as you get more advanced, you struggle to progress on the same exercise within the same week. And again, that's where I would get you to have 2 different variations of an upper and 2 different variations of a lower session. Upper lower fits well into 4 days a week. Push pull legs will actually fit quite well into a 4-day week, because you could do push pull legs, and then you have a rest day you do, and then you start push, and then you wait for the next week, pull legs, and you continue the progress on. Again, same thing applies. You could probably do the same push pull legs and repeat that over time, and then you can keep that running for as long as possible. Or you have 2 different variations of a push, 2 different variations of a pull, 2 different variations of a lower body. Now, if you are someone who doesn't like doing legs,
that's why no one will remember your name.
Then your best bet would be to go push, pull, legs, upper body. Because then you hit the muscle protein synthesis in the frequency box on all of your upper body. You've got 2 sessions which might be enjoyable for you. You have a lower body session which you're going to grind through because you hate it. And then you're going to do an upper body session to like tick those boxes again. A side note and a kind of bonus point is I've actually decided that I've actually come away from specialization. And what I used to do is I used to basically pick a muscle group and get people to do more volume on that muscle group in a week. So if they were training 4 days a week, it would be a push-pull legs, and then it would be whatever the muscle group they were training, that would be the main focus. We'd still have elements of other muscle groups in there, but we would pick the one that they would like want to grow the most. To some degree, that is going to work. To some degree, if you wanted to do that, you would see that muscle increase quicker than something else. But you also don't have to. You could bias a muscle group. So if you are going to do whatever types of sessions, if you're going to do push, pull, lower, and then that upper session should just start and have more exercises and more sets into the muscle group that you're trying to grow without neglecting the others. So you don't necessarily have to hyper specialize into one specific muscle group. You just add in a bit more volume onto that muscle group rather than having a whole session dedicated to it. 5 days a week split is the one that I enjoy the most. This is the one that I think most people will get most progress on. And this is the one where I think it gives you enough flexibility to actually get it done within the week. Some people will train Monday to Friday and that's their 5 sessions and they've got 2 days rest day. They don't train on the weekend and they're done. I like going Monday to Wednesday training, Thursday rest day, and having a Sunday as a rest day. That's the way I like to run my weeks. And I actually, one of my favorite splits is what I mentioned earlier, which is like a lower body pull, so a heavy deadlift, some kind of variation, into like a basically lower, like posterior chain lower body, so hamstring curls are within there, maybe a hip thrust if you're trying to focus on your glutes, but then an upper body pull session within there as well. So pull session with a lower body pull movement in, a push session and a lower body session. Lower body session being more quad focus, and then we go into a push and a pull again. The reason I like doing that, or a pull and a push again, the reason I like doing that is I get the enjoyment of a hypertrophy session on the pull session, but then I also can train the deadlifts, which is going to help me grow my erectors, and I can hit the frequency mark and tick the box on all of them. Because within that pull session, that first day, it can be an amalgamation. It can almost be a full body session to a certain degree with a pull bias. And this is the thing that we'll talk about with like setting up sessions, is that they don't have to be specifically following the same routine or the same split every single time. The exercises can be split out in a way which works for you. So again, that pull session, for example, let's ignore that. Let's say I've got the push session, I've got my lower body session, and I've got a pull and a push, right? Think about what I'm not hitting twice in that week already. So I've got those 4 sessions: push, lower, pull, push. So I'm stimulating push twice. I'm only stimulating lower and pull once. So if I add this day in, which is a pull day, pull focused, pull hypertrophy, pull focused on the upper body, and then a lower body pull exercise, we can also then chuck in some kind of quad movement. We can chuck in a hack squat, we can chuck in a lunge, we can chuck in a back squat, we can chuck in something in that first session which stimulates muscle protein synthesis again on the muscles that we're trying to hit. So we hit that frequency mark. So then it means that, yes, that first session that you do of the week, it isn't a lower session. It's a full body session where we're just trying to tick the boxes and having that session, the exercises that we're hitting throughout the rest of the week, so we get the frequency on it. Like I said previously, the push-pull legs fits really well into a 5-day week, just like the split that I'm doing, which is I am doing the split I'm doing, which is a push-pull leg session, a week A and a week B, that can just keep rolling on and works really well. Now, if you are training that split, then it might work well to like play around with what you enjoy and what works best, because you can do an upper lower as well with 5 days a week. Upper, lower, rest, upper, lower, rest, upper. And that's your 7 days. Yeah? Correct. Good. And the same thing goes for like a full body. The same thing goes for a full body. A full body caps out at 4 times a week, basically. So 4 sessions a week, full body would be the most you would be able to get in, because week 1, you do full body every other day, which is 4 times a week. The next week, every other day, which is 3 times a week. And it just rolls on and on and on. One of the questions I get asked is, can I train 6 or 7 times per week? You can, but do you want to? And the reason I ask if you want to is because if you've got the ability to train every single day, then you may have worked out a training split which fits that you get enough rest and recovery. But my argument would be that you probably need a rest day, and you want to make sure that your progress within the gym is your limit, is your guiding light. Are you progressing in the gym? If you are, then training 6 or 7 days a week might be a good thing. I would argue that you're probably not going as intense as you need to, and you're probably not lifting the weights you could by doing every single day. You're probably not working at the intensity you're going to need to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and actually stimulate growth. So for me, it would be an argument of going, can you actually train 6 or 7 times a week? Now, some of you might be doing bodybuilding or muscle building 5 times a week and they're doing cardio twice a week. You're still going to impact your recovery, and every type of movement, every exercise you're doing, even if you're doing, but I do a recovery bike session on a Wednesday or something. If you're doing a recovery bike session, you're still going to be accumulating fatigue. And if you can continue to progress over time forever and ever and ever, then yeah, great, carry on. But I promise you at some point you're not going to need to. If you struggle to have a rest day, you need to remember that the rest day is going to be the thing that helps you adapt. And adapting to the movement or adapting to the exercises and the stimulus is going to be the thing which actually creates the results that you want. More isn't always better. Doing too much will actually take away from the results you're getting. So training every single day and not having a rest day, even though it sounds great and it probably sounds hardcore, you're not actually going to get the results that you want from that. Recovery is just as important, and you want to be able to increase your weight every single week. You want to be able to perform well, and you can't perform well if you don't recover well. If you're not recovering well because you're training every single day and you're just causing fatigue, then training every day is not a good idea. Again, I would drop down to picking a split and then making that split work over the week. So we should have figured out what splits we're going to be using, right? You can figure out the amount of days you can train within a week. Figure out the split which is going to work best for you, either from an enjoyment standpoint or a lifestyle standpoint. And then from there, just try and get stronger and eat more so you get heavier. If you do those things and you just kick the same exercises in for as long as you can progress on them, and you repeat that over and over again, you are going to build muscle. That leads us on to rep ranges. Now, what rep ranges do you need to use? The basic answer is anywhere from 5 to 30 reps builds muscle. I would default to being like, put the rep ranges in that you most enjoy. I would then side note default into being you want to periodize your rep ranges. So even though we're going to keep the same exercise for as long as we can progress on, we're going to change the rep ranges every 4 weeks. And we do that because we want to kind of periodize our strength. Now, as you start, the higher rep ranges, we want to spend a bit more time getting good at that and getting used to that. We then that's 15 to 20 reps. We then go into a stage where we're going to do 10 to 15 reps for 4 weeks. And then we're going to do a period of time where we do somewhere between like 4 to 10 reps or 5 to 10 reps. Now, the reason we want to periodize it and I change it every 4 weeks is you can't stay in that 4 to 10 reps forever, because it will kill you, because it takes a lot out of you. And what you'll find is the heavier you go, the more demands it has on your central nervous system. And that's when you're going to be ending up feeling way worse. Joints are going to get sore. You're going to start to get injuries. And if you're pretty lean, then that could put you at risk of injuries. So my advice is always spend time within that rep range, because building that strength and getting that top end and increasing that ceiling for the amount of weight you can lift is always going to be beneficial. But just making sure then you go back to the higher rep ranges and you kind of plot them out. Doing that every 4 weeks, but you could keep the same exercise for 12 weeks and progress through the different rep ranges. That would be my advice. So how would I set up my rep ranges? Now, I do different rep ranges for compounds compared to accessories. Weeks 1 to 4, my compound exercises are 8 to 12 reps, and my accessory exercises or my isolation exercises or my smaller or my machine exercises, they are all going to be somewhere between like 15 to 20. Weeks 5 to 8, my compound movements are going to be 6 to 8 reps, and my accessory movements are going to be 8 to 15 or 10 to 15 would be normally what I would go for. So again, accessories being machines and isolation movements. And then weeks 9 to 12, compound movements will be somewhere between 4 to 6 is normally what I tend to stay with. And the accessories will be somewhere between 6 to 10. Now again, you just repeat that on a 12-week basis as you go through the year, and that would be my advice. So why does getting stronger actually help you build more muscle? And it does that because we know that bigger people are normally stronger, so having more muscle increases strength. And we know that strong people also have a lot of muscle. Now, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So some people will argue that strength gains are actually neuromuscular. And what does that mean? That basically means that the coordination of our muscles contracted either individually or together to produce a movement. So that's why at the very beginning, when you're first starting out as a beginner, you will see way more strength gains, because what you're trying to do is learn the movement, which is why, again, I would try and get people to spend more time on one exercise to learn the movement so that they can get better at the movement, so they can get the neuromuscular adaptations, so they can get stronger, and then they can build more muscle. That is the thought process of it. But as you get more advanced, you already have the neuromuscular adaptation, or at least the adaptations that you're getting are way smaller and way more like closer to your ceiling as such, which is why that we just hedge our bets and we go like, let's see if we can just increase strength to build more muscle, and we try to get bigger to increase our strength. If you look at powerlifters, for example, the powerlifters in their weight category who are the strongest, 9 times out of 10 are shorter because they have more muscle that have filled out that weight category, which is why we hedge our bets and go, if we're gonna get stronger, well, let's just get bigger. So if you remember from the start, we wanna make sure that we are increasing our weight every week and that we're getting stronger week to week. That are the two things that we wanna make sure we're doing. Are we getting stronger? Are we getting heavier? And by making sure that we're getting stronger in the gym and that our body weight's going up, it doesn't necessarily matter which does come first, muscle or strength. If we're increasing both, then we are going to be getting stronger and building more muscle. So now, how do we design individual sessions? We know what split we're going to be using, we know how often we're going to be hitting our muscles, we know we've got to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and we do that through eating protein and training more. But what do we do when it comes to the actual sessions themselves? How do we program out and like set a session out? So how do you design a lower body session? Right, don't get hung up on the movements themselves. A lot of people get into a battle of hack squat versus pendulum squat or back squat versus lunge. Like, what is the best one for building muscle? And the thing is, when it comes to this, is the exercise you can progress on and that you can control is going to be one which is going to help you build muscle. How good you are at doing the exercise is going to be the main factor when it comes to building muscle. So, which is why as a beginner, an air squat or a bodyweight squat is really difficult. And if you do that, you will build muscle. And that's why we advance all the way on to leg presses and onto back squats, because they are way more difficult from a coordination standpoint. And again, the neuromuscular adaptations that we're going to be getting to drive strength gains, that is way more difficult when you are getting into those more complex exercises. So we don't necessarily need to worry about hack squat versus leg press and all of these different things and getting stuck in on the detail. We just need to make sure, right, what are the muscles I need to train? What are the joint actions that occur to make sure that those muscles get trained? And how do I do that? How do I pick exercises which target those muscle groups? Now, how do I set up a lower body session? So I would go knee dominant compound or a machine variation. I would then go a hip dominant compound or machine variation. I would then go a single leg squat. I would then go onto a hamstring isolation exercise, a quad isolation exercise, an adductor isolation exercise. You have a glute isolation exercise if you want it, and then you have calf isolation exercises. That would be how I would set up my session. Now, what would that look like? So again, at the very start of a session, we're going to go back squat. We're going to go Romanian deadlift. We're going to go Bulgarian split squat. We're going to go lying hamstring curl. We're going to go leg extension. We're going to go seated adductor machine. We're then going to go into a glute drive or a hip thrust, and then we're going to do a calf raise. That's a very long lower body session. Doesn't need to be that long, because again, those isolation exercises aren't the bang for your buck exercises. If you think within the first 3, we have pretty much hit every single muscle. Whether you're doing a knee dominant exercise, you are going to hit your quads mainly, then your glutes. When you're doing a hip dominant exercise, you are going to hit your hamstrings and your glutes. And then when you're doing a single leg variation of a squat, your adductors are going to kick in to stabilize you and help with the movement. And you're going to be hitting either quad, glute, or something along those lines. And then the rest we kind of fit in, and chuck a calf raise in there if you want to, but the rest we're going to fill in from there. An upper body session can be set up in multiple different ways. You can do all push movements first and then into pull movements, or you can start with the exercise and the muscle you want to build the most. So say I want to build my shoulders the most, then I would start with a shoulder exercise at the very start. Whereas when I actually set up exercises and when I set myself up for programming, I normally go from either the heaviest load to the lightest load I'll be lifting on the day, or the most complex movement to the simplest movement, or a combination of the two. So I would always try to let my sessions go from like the hardest at the very start to the easiest. So as we're getting more tired and more fatigued through the session, that we actually, the amount of total load we lift is going to be less, which means that the risk to injury is going to be less. And it means that the actual hype that we need to get into the session and into that exercise isn't as high as it would be if, for example, we flipped it and we did biceps and triceps first and then we finished with pull-ups or a bent over row. The amount of weight we might be able to lift on that bent over row will be way less. There are arguments for doing that, but I think going from heaviest to lightest or most complex to the simplest is the best way to set up your program. So the way I would set up my upper body sessions: compound pull, flat press, incline press. It would then go into another pull variation. We would then go into a lateral delt exercise, and then we would go into a bicep and tricep exercise. That would hit my whole upper body. That would look something like a pull-up into a bench press, into a dumbbell shoulder press, into a single arm dumbbell row, into a dumbbell lateral raise, into a dumbbell bicep curl, into a dip. But again, don't get hung up on the specific exercise. We want to try and get bang for your buck. Compound exercises are always great for this. And we do that because if you can't hit the biceps and triceps at the end, for example, if you are doing a bench press, some triceps are going to be involved. If you are doing a pull-up or a chin-up, some biceps are going to be involved. So that's why we always pick multi-joint compound exercises, because those are going to be the things which use multiple joints, multiple muscles, and that's going to be able to give us like the best amount of stimulus for the time that we might have. If we don't have long to train, picking bigger compound exercises are going to be the main thing. Now, with every single session that I design and every exercise selection, I'm thinking about three things. I'm thinking about what's the total load that can be lifted with that exercise, what are the stability demands and what are the stability needed, and then where is it going to go within that session, or where does it end up within that session. So if you think about your chest, for example, you have a bench press, you have a dumbbell press, and you have a machine press. All of those presses, to a certain degree, can be switched out for one another. A machine press is going to have the least stability demands. Bench press would be next compared to a dumbbell bench press. Single arm variations are always going to require more stability. Total load to be lifted is going to probably be a bench press or a machine press, because we can lift more when we are more stable. Two hands together on a bench press will give you the ability to lift more on a dumbbell press. For example, I can bench press 140, 145 for a single, but I can't get more than 55, 56 for a dumbbell press. And that's because the stability demands are there. What might be better for pec development and chest development is we want to pick an exercise which is converging, which means that we might be better off picking a dumbbell press because the hands can come together and we can converge and we can take our pec through a lengthened into a shortened range, or we want to pick a machine variation that does that. So these are the things that we're thinking about when picking an exercise, is that there are different reasons why we might pick one over the other. Again, if I'm trying to think strength and total load lifted, I might go for a barbell variation compared to something else. But ultimately, go with what you enjoy. If you're doing a power building approach or you are a powerlifter, keep a bench press in there as always. But if not, then you can pick from any of the different variations. And if you're training the same muscle group twice in a week, you can pick different ones on those days. That's why we talk about a push-pull legs week A and week B, for example. You can have different variations of these on different days. So don't get too hung up on the individual exercise. So how do you set up a push session? So my push sessions pretty much go as followed. You have a flat push, you have an incline push, so like an incline chest focus push. You then have a shoulder press. We then go for a machine fly. We then go for a compound tricep movement. We then go for a lateral raise, and then we go for an isolation tricep movement. So what does that look like? So that would be going into I normally do like a 30-degree incline press as my flat press. It sits better for me, I like it. Just bear with, just let me have it. So I go into a 30-degree incline press. I would then go into an incline machine press, and I would then go into a dumbbell shoulder press, into a machine fly, into a dip, into a lateral raise of some kind, normally like a cross-body lateral raise for me is my favorite at the moment, and then into maybe a single arm tricep extension. And that is the way I would set up most push sessions. Again, when it comes to all the different variations of push exercises, you just have a flat, an incline, a shoulder focused, and then you have like into a machine focused like fly, into a compound tricep, into an isolation tricep, into a lateral raise. Like, you want to, again, go most complex and the heaviest into the lightest and the easiest. A caveat on that is sometimes I will switch around different movements. So like right now when I'm power building, one of the things I'm trying to do is increase the strength of my triceps. So I'm quite a close grip bench presser because it messes with my shoulders when I go wider out. So because of that, it means my triceps are involved a little bit more, which is why at the moment, dips is like my third exercise within that session. And that is because I'm trying to get that stronger and get more muscle into that area. So again, even though we go complex to simplest or like heaviest exercise to lightest exercise, I will always move that around based upon what I'm trying to get out of this session and what I'm trying to prioritize. So how do you design a pull session? With every single pull session and every session you design, you want to think about the muscles you're trying to train and the exercises that train those muscles. Start with the bigger muscles and the bigger compound movements, move to the smaller muscles and the smaller movements that you do within that day. No matter what, I will always start with a pull-up and then into a compound row variation. From there, I would then pick the movements and the exercise order based upon my weaknesses within the session. So for example, I do a pull-up and then I do a bent over row. If I'm trying to hit my lats, then I might go for a single arm variation, or I might go for a single arm row variation to get more lats involved. I may even go into an isolation straight arm lat exercise to try and target my lats, then go into another lat focused exercise, and then go mid-back, rear delts and biceps from there. If my traps are my thing that I want to focus on, then I do exactly the same thing. Pull up, compound row, but now I might do shrugs or a chest supported machine row within there. These are the things you want to be thinking about, is what exercises do I need to train the muscles that I want to train. If I'm trying to increase the size of a muscle, I need to train that earlier on within a session. If it's a priority, then I'm going to train it as early as possible. But again, try to go complex to easiest. So for example, if I'm going to go pull up into my compound lift, then I want to focus on my lats. So I have an isolation straight arm pull down, or I have a single arm seated row. Which will go first? For me, it's always the single arm seated row. It's a compound movement as such. I know it's a machine, but it is a compound multi-joint exercise, but it's going to be trying to target my lats. I'm going to try and set it up in a way to bias my lats. And then I'm going to go on to an isolation single arm movement to hit my lats from there. That way I'm going from complex to easiest, but going from the exercise which is most important to me into the one which is least important, or the hardest, heaviest into the easiest and lightest. So a standard pull session for me at the moment, again, a vertical pull movement, a compound row exercise, a lat focused machine exercise or a lat focused exercise, a mid-back focused exercise, a rear delt exercise, and then we go bicep, bicep. So let's do a little caveat of where deadlifts go within a session. So a deadlift can be either classed as a lower body pull exercise, a back exercise, or a lower body exercise in general. So does it go in a lower session or does it go in a pull session? Depends on what you're doing. If you are doing an upper-lower split, I would probably chuck it in the lower session. If you are doing a push-pull legs, then I would push it in the pull session. That would be my advice. And again, I've already explained what I would do when I'm trying to get a hybrid of a pull and a lower and a session in there. I would put it within that session, obviously. But when I set up my pull sessions, when I've got a deadlift variation in there, it's always going to start with a deadlift variation. So it would start with a deadlift variation, it would then go on to my vertical pull, and then it would go on to my compound pull exercise from there, my compound row. And then literally fill out the exercises from there going forward. Literally exactly the same. The only difference when I'm doing deadlifts is they just go at the start, and then I go vertical pull, so pull up into a compound row, and then all the exercises from there. So how do you design a full body session? Now, a full body session, you want to pick most bang for your buck exercises. Chances are if you're doing full body, then you're only training 2 times a week or 3 times a week, and in which case you want to be trying to hit as much muscle groups as you can. The best way to do that is by doing compound exercises. Compound exercises are multi-joint, meaning that 2 joints move in at the same time, and it also means that it's multi-muscle, meaning 2 muscles or more will be doing the same exercise, or at least contributing to the exercise. So that means that we pick compound movements because they are going to give us more benefit, and it means that we don't have to be in the gym for ages hitting all isolation exercises. For example, if I did my whole session with isolation exercises, one, the weight probably wouldn't be that high, which means I wouldn't be getting like the mechanical tension that we need. So I wouldn't be able to get that progressive overload in the manner that I would want to, because like load on the bar is going to drive the most adaptation that we're going to see, which means that weight on the bar is going to be most important, which means compound exercises are going to lend themselves to having more weight on the bar. So again, making sure that bang for your buck compound exercises are at the start, otherwise isolation exercises, it would just take me forever. Now, the way I actually design it, again, go from the hardest or heaviest exercise or the most complex exercise to the easiest. So if I was to design a full body session, it would be pretty much a back squat. I would probably go into a Romanian deadlift. I would then go into a bench press. I would then go into an overhead press. I would then go into a pull up, and then probably into a bent over row. That would probably be the way I would do it. So it would be a knee dominant compound exercise. It would be a hip dominant compound exercise. We would then go into a flat press. We would then go into an incline or shoulder press. We would then go into a pull up variation, and then we would go into a row variation. That would be the way that my sessions would go. If that was one session, that would literally be how it would go. It would go back squat into Romanian deadlift. It would go bench press into a dumbbell shoulder press or an incline press. It would then go into a pull up, and then it would go into a single arm or a bent over row. That would be how my single session would look. If I'm doing more than one, and I'm going to do 2 or 3 different full body sessions, well, that's where it can start to look a little bit different. We can then start to pick the best bang for your buck exercises and populate it depending on the amount of full body sessions that we're going to do. So what's that going to look like from the most bang for your buck exercises? So a back squat, a deadlift, a bench press. They're your big 3 for a reason. We're then going to go pull up, overhead press, and bent over row. They're always going to want to be in there. Now we're going to want to have some tricep exercise, so dips are a great option, and then some bicep exercise. This would be like a chin-up's a great option because that hits your biceps, or you're going to go into like a dumbbell curl would be my preference. Then from there we can start to get a little bit more like we can branch out with the exercise selection that we choose. For pushing exercises, it would go like an incline dumbbell press, and then either a dumbbell shoulder press or an Arnold press would be great within there. For back exercises, it would be a single arm dumbbell row or a lat pull down. For lower body, it would be a lunge variation, so like a Bulgarian split squat or a walk-in lunge, and a leg press would be in there. For a hinge, it would be a Romanian deadlift would probably go in there. And then you could probably chuck in an isolation exercise of some kind for your lower body if you wanted to. But again, that's going to be the way that most things go. And again, if you're doing 3 different full body sessions, you just split those exercises at the top, and then at the bottom comes in those little bits that you want to top up on. The exercises or the muscle groups you're not hitting as much. A rear delt and a side delt might come into there. You might do some bicep or tricep movements within there. You might do a quad exercise or a quad isolation exercise because that's your focus. But I would always go with the bang for your buck compounds, say over these 3 sessions, and then at the end would be where I would start to input and put in things which are going to be doing the exercises that target in the muscles that I want to train or I want to grow the most. Another way of thinking about it is basically I need to train every single muscle, so I'm going to pick an exercise that trains every single muscle. Again, if you're going to be picking like machine variations which target or bias certain muscles, so again, a lat variation compared to a mid-back variation compared to a trap variation, and you're going to pick an exercise for every delt that you've got, all 3 delts, then you could be in the gym for quite a while. And that's why I would always go bang for your buck, because doing a row, for example, is going to hit your rear delts to some degree, it's going to hit your lats and rhomboids and traps. And that's why I would always go like bang for your buck, because you're going to get multiple muscles being involved in those exercises. And from a time perspective, it will save you time. So how much protein do you need to build muscle? Well, it's going to be 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So for me being 90 kilos, I would aim for about 180 kilos. I always go for 2 for every client, so 2 grams per kilo of body weight. And the reason I do that is because if you fall short, you're probably going to be falling within that 1.6 range, and we're going to be using the top end of that protein allowance. Now, we do it when you're gaining because we want to try and build as much muscle. Protein actually is more important when you're dieting, but that's not on this video or this series, so we're gonna kind of leave that for another month. One of the things we're not sure about is what's more important. Is it total protein intake for the day, or is it going to be your muscle protein synthesis, and spiking that as often as possible? So is it timing of protein and the amount of timing, or is it total protein? I would probably suggest and say that based upon what we know, that total protein is gonna be the main thing, and then we have timing underneath that, which means that we want to focus on getting our total amount of protein first, and then we think about the timing of that protein equally spread out throughout our day every 4 hours after that. Really good way to do it would be whatever your protein is, think about the amount of meals you're going to be eating, and then just divide the protein by that number of meals, and then you know how much protein you need per meal. You could work this out through a calorie counter to and that would probably be a good shout, so you can start to see how much chicken is actually the amount I need. How much of a protein scoop do I need to hit my targets for this? That gives you a good idea, so then if you aren't tracking in the future, you don't have to, because you can eyeball something and know the amount of protein you're going to be getting. If you don't want to track and you're not really sure, my advice is just make sure that every single meal and feeding and time that you eat you have a protein source within that, and you focus your meal around that protein source. That's always the way that I do it. It makes life a little bit easier. I know if I've hit 4 or 5 different protein servings throughout the day, then I probably hit my protein targets. I haven't mentioned it for a while, so let's talk about muscle protein synthesis and why we need to spread our protein out equally across the day. Well, it lasts for 3 to 5 hours, so we want to try and stimulate it probably every 4 hours. It lasts, and the spike lasts for somewhere between 24 to 48 hours overall, and then it peters out back down to baseline. So we want to try and stimulate it throughout the day to try and keep it buffered and try and be in this pro muscle building state for as much as possible, which means that every 4 hours we're going to want a protein serving. So again, take that protein amount that we spoke about previously of whatever yours is, that 2 grams per kilo of body weight, and then divide it by the number of servings you're going to have. So if we're going to have it every 4 hours, we might have it at 8 a.m., then we're going to have it at 12, we're then going to have it at 4, and then we're going to have it later on again at 8 p.m. We might have an additional serving before we go to bed as well. If we've got 4 to 5 servings throughout the day, if we're having protein at each one of those, then we're going to be stimulating muscle protein synthesis. We need about 20 to 30 grams to stimulate that, which means even for someone who's lighter, looking for 120 grams of protein, for example, you'll still be able to stimulate it by eating 20 to 30 grams at each individual mealtime. And obviously the bigger you are and the heavier you are, the more protein you're going to want per mealtime, per serving, to make sure that you're hitting your total protein targets, which again is the most important before protein timing. The way I actually set mine up is I have 4 to 6 meals in a day, and I equally spread out my protein intake pretty much equally. But mine currently looks like 50 grams of protein at every meal, apart from my breakfast. My breakfast at the moment is probably the smallest, which is around 20 to 30 grams of protein. But then my lunchtime meal and then my protein shake are both 50 grams of protein. And then I have my evening meal, which again is around 50 grams of protein. That is normally the way I spread it out. And then I normally will have a protein-based snack before I go to bed as well. And a protein-based snack before you go to bed, it can be good, because obviously overnight you're going to be quote unquote fasting. You're not going to be stimulating muscle protein synthesis, which is why people would say you want to try and eat as close to bed as possible, but that would be based upon digestion more than anything. If it upsets your stomach, then don't eat before going to bed. Again, total protein is going to be more important than spiking that muscle protein synthesis every 4 hours, but we do want to try and stimulate it at least twice. Even if you are someone who fasts and you have an 8-hour eating window, you could get 3 meals within that 8-hour eating window, and that would spike it every 4 hours. Look, if you think about it, say you're going to start eating at 12, first meal at 12, second meal at 4, and then third meal at 8, that spikes it 3 times within a day. It's going to be probably, again, hedging your bets towards what's best. With most things, it's really hard to be, this is the exact way. We have a hunch, we have an idea, we're evidence-based, we're guided by science, but sometimes science is wrong and sometimes we don't know. So it's like if there's a couple of different mechanisms going on or a couple of different hypotheses as to what might be actually happening when it comes to like building muscle and protein intake and the amount of frequency for protein and the frequency for training, then it's like, well, let's just hedge our bets. Let's just try and select a way of eating and a system of eating and an amount of protein and a way of training that is going to push us towards what we think is the right option from a science perspective. So what about the anabolic window? What about eating straight after training? Do you need to smash a protein shake as soon as you finish a session? You don't have to, but it's probably a good shout. The reason I say it's a good shout is we've just trained. So we have depleted some glycogen and we have created some muscle breakdown through training. So it's probably a good idea to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and get some carbohydrates into us to restore those glycogen stores. We know that people who like delay eating carbs after a meal get more sore and like experience like greater degrees of DOMS than we do someone who eats straight after they've trained. Now, what I say is 1 to 2 hours before training and 1 to 2 hours after training is when you want to be eating. But if you take what we've done previously and we've said we're going to eat every 4 hours, for example, then you could say you're training at 2 p.m. and you have a protein and you have a bit of food intake at 12, you're gonna have some more food at 4. That's within that 2-hour window either side. But you can obviously condense these. It doesn't mean you need to be equally every 4 hours, but you can condense them around your training. You're gonna want carbs after, again, to replenish those glycogen stores, but you're probably gonna want carbs before to make sure that you've got energy and you've got like sugars in you so you can actually perform better. Carbohydrates are our main fuel source when we're probably training strength training, especially at a higher rep range. So we want to make sure that we're eating some carbs and eating some protein so that we've got some carbs available for energy and that we're stimulating muscle protein synthesis. I would say no, and the reason is because amino acids are the thing which makes up proteins. And if you consume a complete protein, and that would be a protein that includes all of the 20 amino acids, or at least the 9 essential amino acids. Essential is because our body doesn't actually produce those amino acids, so we need to get them through our diet. If we actually consume a complete protein, then we will be stimulating muscle protein synthesis, and we don't necessarily need the amino acids because we get them from protein. Animal sources of protein and whey protein shakes, for example, are complete sources of protein, so they are a good shout to make sure, which is why you probably don't need an amino acid supplement. Why actually take an amino acid supplement if you can just drink a whey protein shake? Aren't they the same thing? And to understand this, we need to understand, again, muscle protein synthesis. And mTOR is the thing that regulates, or the pathway that regulates muscle protein synthesis. mTOR gets activated through amino acids, but mainly through leucine. And leucine is one of these 9 essential amino acids that we talk about, which is why amino acid supplements have come out on the market. There was a study ages ago which leucine spiked muscle protein synthesis. So people were like, well, surely I can just drink leucine and that's going to be the thing which makes me get massive. And that's not actually true. We need all the building blocks, especially those 9 essential ones. But again, if we can get them from a complete protein source, it means that actually an amino acid supplement is obsolete. We don't need it. So one of the times that I would actually take an amino acid supplement, now I would say that having something like that alongside your meal, if it's not a complete protein source, and I'm not saying this, I'm saying this because it's normally true that most veggie or vegan options won't be a complete protein unless you've really figured out your diet to make sure it includes those things. That's where an amino acid supplement can actually come into play quite handily. You can drink an amino acid supplement or take a pill or whatever alongside your meal to get a complete protein. And that way you would probably be like, again, all these things are hedging your bets and trying to put yourself in the most optimal position and biased position to actually build muscle. But that would be when I would take one, or you can just drink a protein shake. You want to be careful with veggie and vegan options to see what actual amino acids are in there and if they are a complete protein or not, because they might not be. A combination of a rice and pea protein for veggie and vegans, normally going to be a complete protein. The taste isn't very good, so again, amino acid supplement might be the thing for you. And a side note on this is bodybuilders. So some bodybuilders would take an amino acid supplement while they train. And they do this because for them, the logic stands that if you are going to be training, you're going to be creating muscle protein breakdown, whereas we want to keep muscle protein synthesis high, so we want as much amino acids available. So if I drink a muscle protein supplement while I'm training, I'll be spiking it from training, I'll be spiking it from my protein intake. So you can take that approach. We don't really know if it's worth it. Science says it's probably not, but then there is some degree of just kind of looking at successful people and emulating what they do to some degree, which was always a good shout. Like bodybuilders and the people that are the biggest, side note, most of them take steroids that you're following, but those people are the ones that are doing these things, and sometimes science hasn't caught up yet. So it could be worth taking it, but you probably don't need to because of all of the things I've mentioned previously about complete proteins. And as long as your protein intake and your total protein intake is high enough, then you won't actually need to take an amino acid supplement. So when we're trying to create this calorie surplus, what do we actually do? Like, we work out our protein amounts first. It's always going to be the first one. I would then work out your fat amounts, and this would be based upon the essential fats that you're going to need, or the amount of fat which is actually going to be good for hormone production and just like regulating things within your body. And that would be 0.5 grams to 2 grams per kilo of body weight, would be the way that I would suggest to do it. And I would always go based upon preference. So say you prefer more carbs within your diet. Well, you're in a surplus, so you'll have more calories available, which means you will be able to eat more carbs. But I would just go on the lower end of that fat scale. The reason we put fats in there above carbs to some degree is because from a lifestyle standpoint, it's going to be more important. Now, I would also argue that carbs are just as essential, if not more essential, when building muscle, now I think about it. And the reason is because they are actually going to be the thing which is going to help you to produce the efforts that you're going to need within the gym. If you think every single time you train, every single time you go into the gym, the main fuel source that we're going to be using is glycogen. It is those carbohydrates, which means we're going to want to be eating carbohydrates to make sure we can like fuel our sessions. That is going to be the main thing that we're going to want to do. But fats, again, are essential. So maybe when we're trying to lose weight, it would go calories, proteins, fats, carbs. When we're trying to gain muscle and focus on performance, it would probably go calories, protein, carbs, fats. So a little bonus tip within here is that fasting might not actually be that good for muscle building. And that's because, again, if you think about the two different things, muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis, we want to be in an anabolic state, which is stimulating muscle protein synthesis. A catabolic state would be muscle protein breakdown. And now cannibalism, not cannibalism, being catabolic is basically when you don't have the energy available from glycogen to supply you with energy, or you don't have enough fat available to supply you with energy. And now, even though your body can use protein for energy, it doesn't like using protein for energy. It will use what's available, but it normally will go with what you've been doing. So if you've been eating a lot of carbs, the system that uses carbs for fuel is going to be the one that it's going to preference. If you eat a ketogenic diet and you're going to be eating more fats, then it's going to kind of supply your energy from body fat. So if you have enough body fat, you don't really need to worry that much about protein breakdown. So fasting probably isn't that much of a bad idea for you. I.e., like if you're trying to lose weight, I know this is muscle building, but if you're trying to lose weight, then fasting probably is more important to try and get you into lower percentage body fat than it is for someone who is really, really lean trying to get on stage. Someone who doesn't have that much body fat available is probably going to be more susceptible to having muscle protein breakdown and their body using proteins as their fuel source, which means that we want to probably have a higher protein intake when we are dieting to make sure that when we are dieting, we have enough proteins available so that our body doesn't try to steal them all the time to just give us energy. That's why we have a higher protein diet when we're dieting, or a higher protein amount when we're dieting, is to try and kind of preserve as much muscle as possible. And that is why the carbs are so important for when we're trying to gain muscle, is because we want our carbs to be our main fuel source to supply us with the energy, so we don't need to worry about the protein. So fasting might not be a good option. Again, if we think back to protein being one of the things that's going to build the muscle, we want to have as much protein as possible, hit our total amount for the day. We then want to think about the servings, which means that protein in the morning for your breakfast is probably a good idea, because it's going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis early on in the day. That's why we would try to get you to focus on protein. Again, stimulate that protein early on in the day, get that muscle protein synthesis spike, rather than fasting till lunchtime you're doing it. But again, like, you aren't going to be in a position, unless you are someone who is really, really lean and only has essential levels of body fat on them, where muscle protein, or where protein breakdown is going to be occurring all the time, and you're going to be catabolic and you're going to be losing all of your muscle. Like, the chances of that happening are very, very slim. Now, another bonus tip for you is when you actually go into the gym, you want to make sure your phone's on Do Not Disturb. Turn it off, put it on Do Not Disturb, take an iPod with you. Take the old iPod Shuffle with you, would you? Because when you go into the gym, you want to be focused on what you're doing. There's been some studies as well, like if you sit down and think about what you're going to do and think about the importance of it, like you are probably more likely to get more out of that session. Like when people ask like JP, how do you get so hyped for a set? And he's like, because I understand that this set stands in the way of me and my goals. So I'm going to throw every single thing at it. I'm going to throw everything at it because that gives me the anger and the motivation that I need to get through that set. Now for you, whatever you pull upon to get yourself through a set and to work hard and to progress at any cost, then you do that in the right way. You do that by setting yourself up in the right way and making sure that you are grinding through those sets and grinding through those exercises because you have the mentality in the right way. Turn your phone off, think about why you're there, think about what you're doing, and make sure that you have your full focus within your sessions. Perform the exercises the right way, get stronger week to week, take your body weight up, eat the right amount of protein, get a good amount of sleep, make sure you're hitting your muscles as frequently as possible, don't overtrain, don't do too much volume, don't worry about the rep ranges. This is going to be the best thing that's going to help you to build muscle. By now, we've probably got a great idea on how to train, the split we want to use, the amount of days we're going to be training, the fact that we need to train quite frequently, the fact that we need to eat protein quite frequently and the amount that we need to be eating, and then the fact that we need to be in a calorie surplus. We want to be gaining somewhere between 0.5 to 2% of our body weight per month when trying to be in a calorie surplus. Again, the more advanced you are is going to be the smaller amount of gain, and then the less advanced you are, so that if you are more of a beginner, you can go to the higher amounts. And the reason we do all of this is because we're trying to bias building muscle as much as possible, minimizing body fat gain, increasing our performance in the gym and getting stronger to drive those adaptations. Now, when it comes to all of this, the one thing that we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're recovering enough. And this is why we don't train every single day. If your recovery is poor and you're not sleeping and you're not eating and you're stressed out, you aren't going to be in the best position to build muscle. When you think about things and you think about your stress response, when you think about being stressed or think about your nervous system, you've got your parasympathetic and you've got your sympathetic. Your sympathetic being your fight or flight and your parasympathetic being rest and digest. We want to be in our parasympathetic state for recovery, which means that if stress is high, cortisol's high, we're more likely to be in our fight or flight. This is why anxiety for a lot of people is going to be a big factor that we need to kind of combat against. Being anxious about things all the time is going to affect your sleep, but it's also going to put you into this position where you're probably going to have a spike in cortisol. Now, a spike in cortisol isn't necessarily bad. We kind of need that. But if we are going to a position where we are in fight or flight all the time, we aren't sleeping enough and we are just stressed out with work and we're overtraining and training too much, we're doing too much volume, then we're just going to be in this overly stressed state and our ability to adapt isn't going to be there. If you think about, say you have 10 different workers, right? And those 10 different workers get sent on different things. If every single time your workers turn up to work, their building they built yesterday has been dragged down, or they've got a fire going on over there, and they've got something else, a burst water main over there. All of the workers are going to be on fixing the problems, and they're not actually going to be going towards creating a new building. Well, this is the same for muscle building when it comes to volume, your sleep, and your stress levels, and the amount of food you're eating. You want to make sure that they're on point. And this is why, for me, a side note on the steroid thing and the natty or not, because I think the argument is kind of stupid and it's kind of obsolete. It doesn't matter. If you're going to take steroids, you're going to take steroids. If you're not, you're not. What you need to remember is that the steroids aren't the answer to your problems if you haven't got all of these things sorted. If you're not doing the list that I have set out before you, then there's no point going, I reckon I'm going to just hop on gear and that's going to be the solution to all of my problems. It's probably not the best way to go. If you aren't focusing on your sleep and you're not getting that 7 to 9 hours, then you're probably not going to be setting yourself up for a good, for success. If you're not eating a calorie surplus, you're probably not going to be setting yourself up for success. And this is the thing that people can't get their heads around. And this is why I like to kind of talk about this quite a lot. It's to build muscle, you want to get yourself into a very lean position. And you want to get yourself into that very lean position because the leaner you are, the less body fat you'll have. And if you're someone who is very self-conscious with the way they look, that means that when it comes to building muscle, you aren't going to want to go into a calorie surplus and run the risk of gaining body fat if you're already worried about the body fat you've got. So why not switch to this other approach of get really lean, in this position where we're close to as lean as we can be, so then we can build muscle upon that. And this is the problem, is you're running around the houses, you are deciding that this is the best thing, and a single arm lat pull down is the best thing, and not doing enough volume is the best thing, or doing too much volume is the best thing, or training every day is the best thing, or which is the best body part split. Like, you're getting caught up in the details when you're not getting the basics right. And every single time your workers turn up to work, they've got to put out fires and fix water mains and put out the building that they put up yesterday, because you're not sleeping enough, you're not getting enough food, you're not managing your stress levels, you aren't worrying, you're not managing the volume you're training at, you're just overtraining with the amount of volume, and you're doing too much without the intensity to actually stimulate the growth that you want. And you wonder why you're not gaining muscle. The list above, the most important things, but the recovery aspect is going to be so important as well. Prioritize that as much as possible. If you have a glass of water, and every single time you train, you pour that glass of water out. Every time you stress, you pour that glass of water out. Every time you don't have food available for you, you're pouring some water out. And you're not pulling it back in by replenishing it with food, with sleep, with ways of getting yourself into your parasympathetic, your rest and digest, your calm state, then you're never going to get there. Between sets, you shouldn't be pacing around. Before a set, you should be pacing around, getting ready for your set, getting ready to get into it. But in between sets, you want to bring it back down, because being sympathetic all the time, being stressed out all the time is not going to be conducive to the position we want to be in into muscle building. Think about things that are going to help you to de-stress. Think about things which are going to help you get a nighttime routine. You may not have a morning routine. I would rather you have a nighttime routine. Get the same time you go to bed every single night. Your sleep will be way more consistent, and you'll actually sleep deeper. Get off of your phone before you go to bed, like turn the lights down, read a book, do something productive rather than just scrolling TikTok before you go to sleep. Like, the goal should always be to be the best version of yourself, right? And having a nighttime routine and getting yourself to bed on time is actually going to help that. So gang, you made it through that very, very long video. If you have stuck with us, thank you so much. My name's Charlie and this is Hack the Body, Hack the Mind. If you want to support us, I'd like you to head to my website and join our app. We give 2 weeks free trial for you guys to try it out, to see if you enjoy it. And if you do, you can see all of the exercise programs that we have on there. You get access to all of our YouTube videos a month early, and you also get access to all of our fat loss stuff that we've been doing. We have a community that we're building, and come and join it, because the whole thing for me is trying to make this stuff simple so you can get the results that you want. It's £20 a month, give it a 2 week free trial and see if you enjoy it. My name's Charlie, this is Hack the Body, Hack the Mind. We will see you on the next one.